Hey there, woodworkers. Today I'm going to be making a kitchen board similar to one of these. These can be used as cutting boards, charcuterie boards, trivets, any of those, and it's a really fun project. It's also great if you're a beginner. This is a good way to practice gluing up a panel. And so let's get started. What I have here, I've saved some offcuts from other projects, and this can make a great material for doing a cutting board like this with a nice striped pattern. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I've selected these boards from our offcut area, and now I just want to go through and sort of give a rough idea of what design that I want. Then I'll go through board by board and make sure that I have squared each board and prepped it for gluing. Okay, this seems like a pretty good look, and maybe I'll save these pieces for a different project. I think that I'm going to cut most of these in half and sort of get more of our cutting board shape out of those. So, let me go cut these down. I'm going to quickly measure and mark each of these about half the length and cut these down on the miter saw for our cutting board. Okay, so I have my pieces cut to length, or to rough length now. I notice as I'm going through these that some of the boards have already been surfaced and planed, and some haven't. So now I'm going to sort through and determine which of these need to be surfaced. Then I'm going to make sure that each of these has a good jointed edge so that then I can cut them to their final width on the table saw. Okay, so I noticed that the walnut was not surfaced, so I need to plane that before I joint it. So I've set the planer to 7/16, which is about what the thickest one of these boards was. And now I'm just gonna mark each face with a pencil so that I can tell when it's done. For this, I'll need to turn our dust collecting system on. finish my surfacing on our wide belt sander. Okay, so I'm gonna finish my surfacing on these boards on our wide belt sander. These are currently at 3/8 thickness, which is 0.375. So I'm going to set our machine to that number. Then I'm gonna subtract 2/100 of an inch and send them through again. And one final time. All right, so these now have nice surfaced faces. So now I'll go back and get the rest of the boards and run those on the joiner and then the table saw. Okay, I'm gonna take the thinnest of these and set them aside because those won't need to be cut further. And it looks like we're gonna be matching everything to about 2 inches. So I'm gonna examine it, and if it has one good edge and one bad edge, then it's ready for the table saw. If it has 2 bad edges, then we'll need to run it on the jointer. It seems like most of this has at least one good edge. But we'll run these on the joiner. That one's already got a good edge. Okay, so I've set my rip fence to 2 inches. I've set my blade height, and now we're gonna rip each of these boards to 2 inches wide. Okay, just cleaning up my offcuts. Quite a pile of boards. So now we'll gather up all the good ones. Okay, so at this point, we've surfaced these, we've squared them, we've got a good edge on the joiner, we cut them to width on the table saw, and now that I can see what I'm working with, now I really will sort of decide how I want these oriented. Okay, I think that's the look that I'm gonna go for. So at this point, I am just going to cut off a few of these ends, and then we're gonna be ready to glue up. Okay, I think we have everything that we need for glue up. Anytime you're going to be gluing or assembling, you want to make sure to gather all your supplies and have them ready. We're going to be gluing up on one of our workbenches, so I've put down some paper to keep the glue off the table. I've got my glue. I'm going to be using a roller. I've got some paper towels nearby. I've got my clamps, and so I think I'm ready to go. One thing that you want to check before you actually start applying glue is you want to pull your seams together either by hand or with a clamp. And I'm just looking to see and make sure that these glue seams are going to be tight. If there is a gap or a space or something that doesn't look right, then we would want to fix that now before adding glue. So this looks okay. So I think we're ready to go. If this is your first time doing a kitchen board or a glue up, then you probably want to use less pieces than I have here because we only have about 10 minutes to work with. The open time for this glue is 10 minutes. So from the time we start applying glue to the time we want it to be totally in clamps is 10 minutes. So like I said, if you are a beginner, if this is your first time, then maybe choose fewer boards, not so thin as mine. Okay, so I'm going to, I think I'm going to position these and sort of fan them so that I know which one is next. And as soon as I apply the glue, then I'm going to put it into place. Okay. I'll have my roller handy. All right, so we got about 10 minutes. You know, I think I'm going to abandon the roller and just do it the good old-fashioned way, because this may end up being quicker on this glue up. When you're gluing up a panel like this, we're not as concerned about excess squeeze out because we'll be able to plane and sand all of the excess squeeze out once we're done. So don't be shy about using enough glue. It's not necessary to put glue on both sides of each board. As long as you get good coverage on the one side, that is adequate. It's always a good idea to check before you start and make sure you have enough glue. I grabbed these 2 glue bottles, but both of them were near the bottom, so I may have to run over and get another bottle. We'll see. Okay, we are almost done here, and I have made quite the mess. I'll have to clean up. If you're the type of person who enjoys finger painting, then this was a perfect way to apply glue. All right, our last one. Okay, so I'm gonna try to quickly get a little glue off my hands with a paper towel, but I know I'm probably close on time. So I am going to get this in the clamps. Now I'm gonna try to keep these as straight as I can, but I may have to trim some off later. Okay, I'm gonna start applying some equal pressure. And I'm trying to keep everything down as much as I can. Okay, you'll start to notice on top and bottom some squeeze out. And when we're doing a glue up like this, that's actually good because that shows us that there is glue in those seams. So I'm going to give that some pretty decent pressure. If one board comes way out of place, you can try to loosen the clamp, push it back into place, or sometimes even use a mallet. Okay, I think that's about as good as we're going to get. I am going to put one additional clamp on the top as well, just to make sure that we really have some good clamping pressure. Okay, so that's the glue up. We are using Titebond 3, so we need to leave this in the clamps for 30 to 45 minutes and probably several hours before the glue is actually dry. But we can take this out of the clamps in about 30 or 45 minutes. So I'm gonna clean up my mess. Okay, so this glue has been allowed to dry, so we can unclamp this. Okay, our next few steps are to try to remove as much of this glue as we can, and then we'll run this through the planer, joiner, and table saw again to resurface and square our board. Okay, so here I have a glue scraper, okay, and I'm just using the help of a vise to hold this into place, and I'm just going to try to remove as much of this dry glue as I can. Okay, there's still quite a bit of glue left, but that's about as much as I can get off with the scraper. So now I'm going to go over to the planer and plane my faces until I don't see any more torn grain or glue. I've noticed that the board actually is not very flat at all with how much glue is still left. It was having a hard time running through the planer. So I'm going to start here on the joiner and get this a little bit flatter before I run it on the planer. So I've got my push sticks handy, and I'm gonna run this a few times. Okay, hopefully this is flat enough now that we can run it on the planer. Okay, here we are at the planer. I've measured, and this is about 2 inches thick. So that's what I'm going to set my our planer height to. We'll get our dust collector running, and then we'll send this through. Okay, and I want to keep as much thickness as I can, So I'm just gonna run this through until I see that it's clean on both sides. Okay, we're looking pretty clean on both faces. So now I'm gonna go finish this up on the wide belt sander. Okay, we'll set it to 1.84. And again, I'm trying to keep as much thickness as possible. So I'm just running this through until I see that there's no torn grain and no planer or machine marks. Okay, so both faces are looking real good. No torn grain, and there's a few little marks, but that'll come out when we sand it with our hand sander. Okay, what I'll do now is I'm going to joint each edge just once, just to clean up that edge, and then I'm going to use the table saw to cut my final lengths, and that'll finish squaring our cutting board. Okay, I'm here at the table saw. We now have good, clean faces and edges, and we just need to cut these ends off. But I want to leave as much width as I can. So we're just going to cut off as little as possible. The first thing that I'll set is my blade height. And since I'm cross-cutting, then I've got my miter gauge here helping to support my material. So what I'll do is I'm just going to line this up until I can see that it's going to cut off just a bit. I'll run it, and then we'll see if I need to cut off a little bit more. I've noticed that I need to cut off just a little bit more. So I'm going to let that spin down before I reset it. Okay, so let's cut off just a little more, right there. Okay, let me just see where we're at here. We're at about 11 3/4 this way. And so maybe I decide I want this to just be a square. Okay, so we're actually at 11 13/16. So now I'm going to set my rip fence to match that. So 11 13/16. I'm still going to use my miter gauge for support. And we'll make our last cut. It's always a good idea to just wait, let your saw blade totally spin down before removing any material. All right, this is looking pretty good. So we've got it glued up. We're now squared all around. So the last few things to do, I'm gonna route a little round over edge on here, and then we'll be ready to use our hand sander. Okay, so what I've got here is I've got my hand router with a little 3/16 round over bit loaded into there. I want to make sure and secure my material while I'm routing. And I'm also keeping in mind that since I'm using solid wood, I want to route the end grain before I route the edge grain. So I'm going to use these clamps to just help me keep my cutting board in the right spot. A little bit of burn that I'll have to sand out by hand. Okay, now that I've routed all my end grain, then I'm going to rotate my board and route all the edge grain. Okay, now that we've routed each of those edges, they feel nice and round. And so my next step is to begin sanding. Okay, so I'm set up here at my sanding table. I'm going to start off with some 180. I would recommend starting off with somewhere in the 100s, whether that's 150, 180, maybe even 120. That'll be your first sanding grit. And the purpose of that is to sand out any machine or tool marks and any torn grain, and to sand out any of the scratches left from the wide belt sander. Once I've done that, then I'll move on to my 220 grit, and I'll be working on sanding out any scratches from the 180 and so on. I'm going to use a little pencil trick and cover the whole thing in a little bit of pencil. That lets me know when I've covered all the surface, and then I can double check it. So sanding is a little bit of a lengthy process to do it correctly, but it's also one of the most important things you can do because it really helps your project to look professional. Okay, a couple of tips while sanding. You always want to make sure that your sander is constantly moving so that you don't sand too much in one spot. And then once you've sanded the whole surface and your pencil mark is gone, then you do just want to give a little visual inspection and see, and you may need to do another pass with that sanding grit before you move on to the next one. Typically, I spend the most of my time sanding with my first grit. And if I do a good job with my first grit, then usually progressing through the finer grits goes a little bit faster and better. Be careful while you're sanding the edges. If you're going to use the palm sander, or you can do it by hand, but we just don't want to change the profile of the edge. We just want to stay flat with the edge. I'm not sure if you can see, but I do have some table saw marks left over on the end grain. End grain is harder than long grain, and so this is going to take me longer to sand through. If this was one of my own pieces that I was going to take home or give as a gift, then I would spend the time sanding down that end grain until I don't see any more saw marks or tool marks. For this video demonstration, just to shorten things a bit, then I'm just going to leave it as is. I'll probably come back to it later on and finish that off. I do have a little bit of burn in some spots where the router was moving a little too slowly. So I'm going to just use some hand sandpaper to try to remove those burn marks. What I'm doing now is I'm just kind of softening these edges and corners just a bit, just to make them feel a little bit more friendly and not quite as sharp. Okay, so I've worked through my 180. Now I'm going to switch, move on to my 220. And for this project, I'm going to sand up to a 320 grit, but you can take it as high as you'd like to when it's your project. When you think that you're done sanding, just give it a visual inspection all over and make sure that you haven't missed anything. Once you decide that it's finished sanding, I'm going to take an air hose and dust this off really well. And then we can add our finish. Okay, we're ready to apply some finish to this project. We've sanded everything as good as we'd like it to be. And since I'm going to be using this for in the kitchen and for food, then I want to do a food safe finish. And so there's lots of different things you can use: beeswax, mineral oil. There's a bunch of different products out there. So I'm just going to be using a food grade mineral oil conditioner. And I've got some paper towels, and basically I'm just going to wipe it everywhere and allow it to soak in. And then I'll grab some clean paper towels and then wipe off the excess so that it doesn't feel oily. This mineral oil that I'm using is not a permanent finish. So similar to with other kitchen wood products, you will have to reapply some oil like this, depending on how much you use it. Could be every few months or just periodically if you notice that it needs another coat of oil, then you can always add more. Okay, there you have it. So we've made ourselves a really nice kitchen board. I can use this as a cutting board or a trivet or a charcuterie board. And like we said in the beginning, oftentimes you can just gather some of the offcuts that you have from other projects and they can turn into something beautiful like this.